Let's now take a look at how to draw the chest, the abdomen, and the pelvis, or the pelvic forms. So when we think about the chest, a good basic starting point is really just a rectangular kind of block, just to get the bulk of the mass. And for the abdomen, what is pretty good to use is a sphere. And then for the pelvis, a very basic shape could be some kind of triangle, upside down pyramid, should I say. Something like that. And when you connect them together and you kind of scale them correctly, you get something like this. Which, you know, for rudimentary purposes makes some sense, because there's always that point of rotation in the abdomen here. So we know that the abdomen can rotate. And so it seems like a nice hinging point. But when we take these very, very basic forms and we start bending them, we get somewhat different types of forms. And I'm going to show you the forms that I like to use, just the very basic forms that I like to use, the dynamic forms, for drawing the chest, the abdomen, and the pelvis. And there are forms that really help add on the arms and the legs and the head and the neck. So we take that block and we kind of start bending it on all of its sides. And I've taken some cues from the rib cage, and I add this V shape to my abdomen, very much like that. And so I've taken that basic block shape and really modified it into this shape. Just going to draw through here so we can see the sides. Modified it into this type of shape. And this upside down V shape really is great for slotting in the abdomen, which I keep a sphere because it really actually works really well as a sphere. It doesn't need many changes. And so you now have the chest kind of plugging in nicely into the abdomen in terms of the basic forms. And then what about the pelvis? You know, the triangular pyramid shape is a bit harsh. It's a little bit harsh for a pelvis. And so what I do again is really apply that dynamic shape theory and bend the form in a way. I'm going to just rotate it a bit forward here so we can see the top. And I use an ellipse. And instead of it being square, so this shape would be really something, this form should I say, would really be something like that. But instead of having it square, I have it round. And I make it kind of like a cup or a teacup type of thing, kind of a very pointy bowl, if you wish. And what I like to do is draw ellipses on the sides of it, running through. So that would be seeing through the form there, and over here this would be the front ellipse, as zones that we can plug the legs into when we get there. But really, without getting too technical, we're really just taking this upside down pyramid and using an ellipse and still getting that pyramid shape where the form would really be having these types of contour lines on it. And if we drew through it, it's really very much like a cup. And I find that works particularly well when you add it to the rest of these forms. So in a nutshell, really, these are the forms, the typical forms that I use pretty much all the time when I'm drawing, which are basically just dynamic versions of those basic static shapes, right? And what's great to do, before we get to the skin, adding kind of basic skin layer on top of it, but what's great to do is play with the various angles and rotations. So you can see I drew in a 3/4 there previously. Let's just go back to that. So this is very much a 3/4 view, and 3/4 is great because we see the front, the side, front, side. Here we can see the top a little bit, front and the side a little bit. And we can add those ellipses and it gives us even more of a side view of where the leg can plug in. But to really realize that the joint here, if you want to call it a joint, this pivot point of the abdomen is great because the chest can move sort of forward on the pivot point. It can move back on the pivot point. It can move side to side. And these are things we really want to get used to. Get used to this idea that we can actually pivot these basic forms and even twist them. So let's look at some form examples of those very things. So here I'll do the basic chest form, bending those sides, putting the sphere in there, and then ensuring that the shoulder line here, really that's what that is, the shoulder line, and the line of the pelvis are not parallel to one another. All right? And using center lines as well helps us to understand what we're doing in terms of the direction that these forms are facing. So I have a center line down here, and we can see that this is facing that way, that's facing that way, and this is also facing that way. And so here we have a chest that is bending to the left on this pivot point, yet the pelvis still stays at an upright angle. So you could say that the vertical tilt of the pelvis looks like that, and the vertical tilt of the abdomen, of the chest, looks like that. We'll get more into detail on tilts later on, but something to think about for now. We can also do twisting. So we can have the chest over here, excuse me, facing to the left, just bending those lines. Chest faces to the left, and we can indicate that with the center line. Its curve points to the left. All of its curves really point to the left. Put in our sphere. But then, when we add the pelvis, change its center line and have it curving to the right. Obviously the back here won't curve, but for the most part its center line curves to the right. And so now we have a twist happening in the form, which is totally possible. Your chest can face one way, your pelvis can face another, and this adds some nice dynamism, especially to your poses. Using these basic forms and really using the stomach or the abdomen area here as a pivot point, right? It's a sphere that can pivot. So we can bend it, and we can twist it, and we can also just draw it front on, not front on, just basically all facing the same direction. We want to always draw in 3D. Using these basic forms, center line on the sphere, center line on the chest, center line on the pelvis, and we can see multiple sides, which is great. And now they're all kind of uniform. This is a bit dull in terms of posing because there is a parallel between the shoulder line and the pelvic line here, right? We don't want that, generally speaking. But nevertheless, still looks 3D, and you can still feel the weightiness of it. Let's take a look at adding some skin onto these forms. So I'll draw it again. It's good practice. Just keep redrawing. It's very simple, and you can see I'm very loose. I'll always encourage you to be loose when you're drawing, especially drawing your planning forms. Don't worry too much about proportions for now. Just be loose and free and just feel out the forms. And so here we have that basic model again of these forms. Dynamic forms once again. We have directionality in all of the forms, obviously barring the sphere, which you could add directionality to it if you wished to make it more of an ovular shape. But it's up to you. And when we want to add surface detail to this, our basic surface detail is really that's the top there, and we come down to the side, kind of follow the forms just in a basic way. And without too many lines, we can get some good surface detail. Could kind of even imagine from this, because of how we draw that upside down V, that perhaps the chest is somewhere around here, just above the rib cage. Maybe this is a male form. We can very easily get that form with, you know, and if you really look at these lines, they're not crazy detailed lines. They're just, you know, line there and it goes straight down. Why? Well, we're kind of sticking to the general idea of the skin going over these forms, right? And we can get a fairly convincing skin view based on the form. So if the form is strong, drawing the skin is not that hard. Obviously, sure, we want to have that anatomical knowledge, which we have to learn by observing and copying anatomy from anatomy references, right? So that will really add to our understanding of the form, but and really give us the little micro details when we're adding little bumps onto the skin surface. Like here, this is the ilium crest from the actual pelvic bone. It adds that realism, and here I can add the acromion, which pokes out just before we hit the deltoids of the shoulder. And anatomy gives you these things and helps you to know where to place things. You know, when you're studying complex anatomy, more detailed anatomy. But the bottom line really is that it's all defined and all based on the strong foundations of strong forms. All right. Let's do one more example. Let's just go through it one more time, just so it's super clear. We're bending that basic box. We're bending its sides. We're adding directionality to everything. Drawing through. I'll draw through more on this one, just so we have a much clearer picture. Adding that sphere for the abdominal area. And then we're really changing the shape of that upside down pyramid. And imagining it kind of goes down like that. Let's change the middle line to that. And we have this 3D structure happening on that form. And then once again, we just draw some simple lines conveying how the skin is falling over these forms, almost like cloth falling over these forms in a sense, kind of tight cloth. And we know the arms will plug in somewhere around here. Just do a line, the skin falls down, down, and we can stop there because the legs are going to come in. The crotch is here, a line there, add in the shoulders, but we know that the head is going to plug in somewhere here probably. So I'll draw these ellipses just to show these points. Generally don't need them, you generally just stack the forms on top of each other. And also this upside down V does imply the rib cage area. And we have a fairly convincing form. Great. That is the end of the chest, the abdomen, and the pelvis basic forms video.